The rain drummed against the tall windows of Windsor Castle as Captain James Morrison finished his final patrol of the night. 25 years of dedicated service to the Crown had taught him to notice even the smallest details that seemed out of place. Tonight, something felt different in the ancient halls that had housed British royalty for centuries. Morrison adjusted his ceremonial sword and checked his pocket watch. It was nearly midnight, and the castle should have been quiet except for the occasional footstep of fellow guards making their rounds. The Queen had passed away just 6 months ago, and the entire royal household was still adjusting to the new order under King Charles III. As he walked past the blue drawing room, Morrison noticed a faint light flickering beneath the heavy oak door. His trained instincts immediately went on alert. This room housed some of the most precious items from the late Queen's personal collection, including jewelry that had been worn by generations of British monarchs. No one should be in there at this hour without proper authorization. Morrison pressed his ear against the door and heard the soft sound of drawers being opened and closed. Someone was definitely inside, moving carefully but not silently enough to escape his notice. He reached for his radio to call for backup, then hesitated. If this was simply a confused member of the household staff or a family member dealing with grief in their own way, calling in additional guards might create an unnecessary scandal. Instead, Morrison decided to investigate alone. He slowly turned the ornate brass handle and pushed the door open just wide enough to peer inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. Queen Camilla, dressed in a dark coat and wearing gloves, was carefully removing items from the late Queen's jewelry collection. She held up a magnificent diamond necklace to the light, examining it closely before placing it into a small velvet bag. Several other pieces lay scattered on the mahogany table beside her, including the famous ruby brooch that Queen Elizabeth had worn to countless state occasions. Morrison watched in stunned silence as Camilla continued her work with the efficiency of someone who had planned this carefully. She seemed to know exactly which pieces she wanted and where to find them. The sight of the Queen consort stealing from her predecessor's collection was so shocking that Morrison initially wondered if he was witnessing some kind of authorized transfer of items, but something about Camilla's secretive behavior and the late hour told him this was not official business. She kept glancing toward the door nervously and worked quickly, as if afraid of being discovered. When she picked up the late Queen's favorite pearl earrings, the ones she had worn in her final official portrait, Morrison knew he had to act. The captain stepped fully into the room and cleared his throat loudly. "Your Majesty," he said in a firm but respectful voice, "might I ask what you are doing here at this hour?" Camilla spun around, her face pale with shock. For a moment she looked like a deer caught in headlights, clutching the pearl earrings against her chest. Several expensive rings fell from her other hand and clattered onto the Persian carpet. "Captain Morrison," she said, trying to compose herself, "you startled me. I was simply organizing some items that belonged to my late mother-in-law. The king asked me to review her personal effects." Morrison's eyes moved from Camilla's guilty expression to the velvet bag filled with jewelry, then to the scattered gems on the table. His decades of experience in security told him that this explanation didn't add up. If this was official business, it would have been done during daylight hours with proper documentation and witnesses present. "I see," Morrison replied carefully. "And does His Majesty know you are conducting this business at midnight, Your Majesty?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Camilla's composure began to crack as she realized that her story wasn't convincing the experienced guard. She had underestimated Morrison's sharp instincts and attention to detail. "Of course he does," she snapped, her voice taking on an imperious tone. "I don't need to explain my actions to a guard. These items will eventually be mine anyway as Queen Consort. I'm simply taking inventory." Morrison remained calm but firm. "Your Majesty, with respect, any transfer or cataloging of the late Queen's personal effects requires proper documentation and authorization. I'm afraid I'll need to see written permission from His Majesty before I can allow you to remove these items from this room." Camilla's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. She had been caught red-handed, and they both knew it. The lies were becoming more desperate, and Morrison's polite but unwavering stance was making it clear that he would not be intimidated by her royal title. "How dare you question me?" she hissed. "I am the Queen Consort of England. These baubles belonged to a woman who never accepted me into this family. She would have wanted me to have them. The mask was slipping and Morrison could see the real motivation behind the theft. This wasn't about official business or proper inheritance. This was about resentment, jealousy, and a desire to claim what Camilla felt she deserved after years of being treated as an outsider by the late queen. Morrison stood his ground, his hand moving instinctively toward his radio. "Your Majesty, I'm going to have to ask you to put down the jewelry and step away from the table. This matter will need to be reported to the appropriate authorities." The confrontation had reached a turning point. Camilla realized that her attempt to secretly acquire the late queen's most precious possessions had failed spectacularly. She was now faced with a choice: continue the charade and dig herself deeper into trouble, or find another way to handle the situation. The ancient castle walls seemed to close in around them as the two figures faced each other in the dimly lit room, surrounded by centuries of royal history and tradition. Neither could have predicted that this moment would change both of their lives forever, setting in motion events that would shake the very foundations of the modern British monarchy. Morrison's training had prepared him for many situations, but never for catching a member of the royal family in the act of theft. The weight of duty pressed down on his shoulders as he realized that whatever happened next would have consequences far beyond this single room in Windsor Castle. Camilla's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. The velvet bag containing the stolen jewelry felt heavy in her hands, a physical reminder of her guilt. She could see in Morrison's steady gaze that he would not be swayed by threats or royal privilege. "You don't understand the situation," she said, her voice becoming more desperate. "The late queen left specific instructions about these pieces. She wanted me to have them as a gesture of acceptance into the family." Morrison's expression remained neutral, but internally he was processing every word. He had been present during many private conversations between senior staff about the queen's final wishes, and he knew there had been no such instructions regarding Camilla. If anything, the queen had been very specific about keeping her most precious jewelry separate from the crown jewels, ensuring they would be properly preserved for future generations. "Your Majesty," Morrison said quietly, "if such instructions existed, they would have been documented through the proper legal channels. The Queen was meticulous about such matters. I'm sure you understand that I cannot simply take your word on something of this magnitude." The captain's calm professionalism was infuriating Camilla, who was used to having her authority respected without question. She had spent years working to establish her position within the royal family, and now this guard was treating her like a common criminal. "I could have you dismissed immediately," she threatened, stepping closer to Morrison with the jewelry still clutched in her hands. "One word from me to the king and your career would be over. Is that really what you want?" Morrison had faced down armed intruders, hostile crowds, and international security threats during his career. He was not intimidated by veiled threats from someone caught in wrongdoing, regardless of their title. His loyalty was to the crown and to justice, not to any individual who might abuse their position. "Your Majesty," he replied with unwavering calm, "my duty is to protect the crown's interests and uphold the law. If that costs me my position, then so be it. But I cannot allow valuable royal artifacts to be removed without proper authorization." Camilla realized that intimidation was not going to work. Morrison was clearly one of those old-school guards who took his oath seriously. She needed a different approach, something that might appeal to his sense of duty and discretion. "Listen," she said, softening her tone and trying to appear vulnerable. "You're right that this looks suspicious. But the truth is more complicated than you realize. Charles and I have been having difficulty since his mother's death. He's been distant, cold. I thought if I could wear some of her jewelry to important events, it might help bridge the gap between us." She paused, allowing a few tears to form in her eyes. It was a performance she had perfected over the years, one that had helped her navigate the treacherous waters of royal politics. "I know I should have asked permission first," she continued, "but Charles has been so overwhelmed with his new responsibilities as king. I didn't want to burden him with what might seem like a trivial request. I thought I could simply borrow a few pieces and return them after wearing them to a few state functions." Morrison listened carefully to this new explanation, but his training told him it was another fabrication. If Camilla had simply wanted to borrow jewelry for official events, there were established protocols for that. More importantly, her initial behavior had been that of someone stealing, not borrowing. She had been concealing the items and working in secret during the middle of the night. Your Majesty, Morrison said, if you intended to borrow these items, why are you here at midnight? Why not make the request through proper channels during business hours? Camilla's carefully constructed story began to crumble under Morrison's logical questions. She had hoped that an emotional appeal might cloud his judgment, but his military training had taught him to see through deception regardless of its packaging. Because I knew they would say no, she admitted, her mask slipping once again. The household staff still sees me as an outsider. They would have found reasons to deny my request, just like they did when I wanted to redecorate my private chambers. This admission revealed more truth than Camilla had intended. It confirmed Morrison's suspicion that this was not authorized activity, and that she knew her actions were wrong. It also revealed deep-seated resentment toward the royal household staff and her position within the family structure. Morrison made a decision that would change everything. He reached for his radio and pressed the button to contact the Central Security Office. "This is Captain Morrison," he said clearly. "I need immediate assistance in the Blue Drawing Room. We have a situation that requires the presence of the head of security and legal counsel." Camilla's face went white with panic. "No, wait," she pleaded, reaching out as if to grab the radio. "You don't need to involve others. We can work this out between us. I'll return everything right now and we can forget this ever happened." But Morrison had already released the radio button, and his message had been received. Within minutes, they could hear footsteps approaching down the corridor. The situation was about to escalate far beyond what either of them had anticipated. "Your Majesty," Morrison said with genuine sympathy in his voice, "I wish you had chosen a different path tonight, but my oath requires me to protect the Crown's interests, even when that puts me in conflict with members of the royal family." Camilla sank into one of the ornate chairs, still clutching the stolen jewelry. The weight of her actions was finally sinking in, and she realized that her impulsive decision to take the jewelry might have consequences far beyond anything she had imagined. The approaching footsteps grew louder, and soon the room would be filled with security personnel and legal experts who would have to decide how to handle an unprecedented situation. Never before in modern British royal history had a queen consort been caught stealing from the Crown's collection. As they waited for the others to arrive, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Morrison maintained his professional demeanor while keeping a careful watch on Camilla, who seemed to be calculating her next move. The stolen jewelry lay scattered between them, like evidence of a crime that neither had expected to be dealing with on this stormy night at Windsor Castle. The heavy oak door burst open as Sir William Hartley, head of royal security, strode into the Blue Drawing Room, followed by 2 additional guards and the castle's legal advisor, Margaret Thornfield. The scene that greeted them was unlike anything they had encountered in their combined decades of service to the Crown. Queen Camilla sat rigidly in the antique chair, her face a mask of defiance mixed with barely concealed panic. Scattered across the mahogany table were some of the most precious pieces from the late Queen's personal collection, while a velvet bag containing additional stolen items rested near her feet. Captain Morrison stood at attention, his expression grim but resolute. Sir William's weathered face showed no emotion as he took in the scene, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. He had served the royal family for over 30 years, and had never imagined he would be called upon to handle such a situation. The implications were staggering, not just for the individuals involved but for the monarchy itself. "Captain Morrison," Sir William said in his crisp military tone, "please provide a full report of what transpired here tonight." Morrison straightened and delivered his account with the precision of a seasoned professional. He described discovering the light under the door, witnessing Camilla removing jewelry from the collection, and the subsequent confrontation. He spoke clearly and factually, avoiding any editorial comments or personal opinions about the Queen Consort's behavior. Throughout Morrison's report, Camilla remained silent, but her lawyer's trained mind was working furiously to find a way out of this disaster. She had underestimated how quickly the situation would spiral out of control, and now she faced not just embarrassment, but potentially serious legal consequences. Margaret Thornfield, the legal advisor, stepped forward with a tablet in her hands. As someone who had helped draft many of the protocols governing royal property and inheritance, she understood the legal ramifications better than anyone else in the room. "Your Majesty?" She addressed Camilla with careful formality, I need to inform you that the removal of items from the Crown's collection without proper authorization constitutes theft under British law, regardless of your position within the royal family. These particular pieces were specifically designated in Her late Majesty's will as part of the historic collection to be preserved for the nation. The words hit Camilla like physical blows. She had assumed that her status as queen consort would provide some protection, but Thornfield was making it clear that royal privilege did not extend to criminal behavior. This is absurd, Camilla finally spoke, her voice shaking with anger and fear. I am the queen consort. These items will eventually be mine anyway. How can it be theft to take what rightfully belongs to me? Sir William exchanged a meaningful glance with Thornfield before responding. Your Majesty, that is not accurate. The late Queen's personal jewelry collection was specifically bequeathed to the British people as part of the royal heritage. Individual pieces may be loaned for state occasions, but ownership remains with the Crown estate, not with any particular member of the royal family. This revelation seemed to genuinely surprise Camilla, suggesting that she had been operating under false assumptions about her inheritance rights. Her face flushed as she realized that her justifications were crumbling under legal scrutiny. Furthermore, Thornfield added, consulting her tablet, the items you attempted to remove tonight have a combined estimated value of over £3 million. This elevates the matter from simple theft to grand larceny, which carries significant penalties under British law. The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation became clear to everyone present. This was not a simple misunderstanding or family dispute. It was a serious crime with the potential to create a constitutional crisis. Morrison watched the proceedings with mixed emotions. While he felt vindicated in his decision to report the incident, he also felt sympathy for the position Camilla had put herself in. Her desperation and resentment had led her to make choices that could destroy not only her own reputation but also damage the monarchy that he had sworn to protect. Sir William turned to address the broader implications. We need to consider how to proceed in a way that protects both the integrity of the investigation and the stability of the Crown. This matter must be handled with absolute discretion while ensuring that justice is served. Camilla seized on this opening. Exactly, she said, leaning forward eagerly. There's no need for this to become public knowledge. I'll return everything immediately, and we can all agree that this was simply a misunderstanding. No harm has been done. But Thornfield shook her head firmly. Your Majesty, criminal law doesn't work that way. A crime has been committed witnessed by a reliable member of the Royal Guard and documented by multiple witnesses. We cannot simply pretend it didn't happen because it's inconvenient. The legal advisor's words crushed Camilla's hopes for a quick resolution. She was beginning to realize that her impulsive decision to steal the jewelry might have consequences that would follow her for the rest of her life. Sir William was already thinking several steps ahead. We need to contact His Majesty immediately. This situation cannot proceed without his knowledge and input. Additionally, we'll need to secure all the items as evidence and ensure that nothing else is missing from the collection. At the mention of involving King Charles, Camilla's composure finally cracked completely. You can't tell Charles, she pleaded, abandoning all pretense of royal dignity. He's already under so much pressure adjusting to his new role. This would devastate him. Please, there must be another way. Morrison felt a pang of sympathy despite everything that had happened. Camilla's fear of disappointing the king seemed genuine, and for the first time that night her emotional response appeared authentic rather than calculated. But Sir William remained unmoved. Your Majesty, His Majesty is the head of this institution. He has a right to know when it has been compromised, especially by someone so close to him. Our duty is to the Crown first, to individual preferences second. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as everyone contemplated the phone call that would have to be made to the king. Charles would have to be awakened and informed that his wife had been caught stealing from his mother's precious collection. The personal and political implications were staggering. Camilla buried her face in her hands, finally understanding that there would be no easy escape from the consequences of her actions. The stolen jewelry lay before her like evidence of a moment of weakness that would define the rest of her life. Sir William stepped into the adjoining chamber to make the most difficult phone call of his career. The conversation with King Charles would have to be handled with extreme delicacy, given both the personal nature of the betrayal and the potential constitutional implications. Meanwhile, the others remained in the blue drawing room, where the tension was so thick it seemed to press against the ancient walls. Margaret Thornfield began documenting everything with methodical precision, photographing the scattered jewelry and making detailed notes about each piece. Her legal training told her that building a strong evidentiary record was crucial, regardless of how the royal family ultimately decided to handle the situation. Morrison stood guard near the door, his mind racing through the implications of what he had witnessed. 25 years of faithful service had taught him that duty sometimes required making unpopular decisions. But he had never imagined that duty would put him in direct conflict with the Queen Consort herself. Camilla watched the legal documentation process with growing horror. Each photograph and notation felt like another nail in the coffin of her royal career. She had gone from being Queen Consort to criminal defendant in the span of a few hours, and the reality was slowly sinking in. "This is going to destroy everything," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else in the room. "Charles will never forgive me. The public will crucify me. How could I have been so stupid?" Thornfield looked up from her work with something approaching sympathy. "Your Majesty, the situation is serious, but it's not necessarily hopeless. The Crown has faced scandals before and survived. What matters now is how you choose to handle the consequences of your actions." Before Camilla could respond, Sir William returned to the room, his face even more grave than before. The conversation with the king had clearly been as difficult as anticipated. "His Majesty will be here within the hour," he announced. "He has cancelled his morning appointments and is traveling from Highgrove House immediately." He was understandably shocked by the news. Camilla's face went pale. She had hoped against hope that somehow this matter could be resolved without Charles having to confront the reality of what she had done. Now she would have to face not only the legal consequences, but also the personal devastation of having betrayed her husband's trust. "What did he say?" she asked in a voice barely above a whisper. Sir William hesitated before responding. His Majesty requested that all evidence be preserved and that no decisions be made until his arrival. He also asked that this matter be kept strictly confidential until he can assess the full situation. The next hour passed with agonizing slowness. Thornfield completed her documentation while additional security personnel secured the blue drawing room and conducted a full inventory of the late Queen's collection to ensure nothing else was missing. Morrison remained at his post, professional as always despite the extraordinary circumstances. Camilla sat in increasingly uncomfortable silence, alternating between defiance and despair. Sometimes she would sit up straight and glare at her captors as if offended by their treatment of her. Other times she would slump in her chair, the weight of her actions pressing down on her like a physical burden. When King Charles finally arrived, the change in atmosphere was immediate and electric. Even before he entered the room, everyone could sense his presence in the castle. Sir William and Morrison stood at rigid attention, while Thornfield gathered her materials. Camilla remained seated, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Charles entered the blue drawing room looking exhausted and aged beyond his years. The past 6 months of adjusting to kingship had already taken their toll, and this personal crisis was clearly the last thing he needed. His eyes immediately went to the scattered jewelry, then to his wife, who finally looked up to meet his gaze. "Camilla," he said simply, and the single word carried a weight of disappointment and betrayal that filled the entire room. "Charles, I can explain," she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "Before we discuss anything personal," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I need to understand the legal situation. Sir William, please brief me on the evidence and the potential charges." For the next 20 minutes, Charles listened with the focused attention of a man trying to understand how his life had suddenly become a legal nightmare. Sir William and Thornfield presented their findings with professional detachment, but the human cost was evident in everyone's faces. When the briefing was complete, Charles turned to Morrison. "Captain, I understand you discovered this situation. I want to personally thank you for your professionalism and dedication to duty. I know this couldn't have been easy." Morrison straightened even more if possible. "Your Majesty, I only did what my oath required. I wish the circumstances had been different." Charles nodded gravely, then finally turned his full attention to Camilla. The look that passed between them contained years of history, recent happiness, and now this devastating betrayal. "Why?" was all he asked. Camilla's carefully prepared explanation suddenly seemed pathetic and inadequate. Under her husband's penetrating gaze, all the justifications and rationalizations crumbled away, leaving only the raw truth. "I was angry," she admitted, tears finally beginning to flow. "Your mother never accepted me, never treated me as worthy of being part of this family. When she died, I thought finally I could take my rightful place. But even in death, she's still here, still making me feel like an outsider." The admission hung in the air like a confession. For the first time, Camilla had revealed the deep-seated resentment and jealousy that had motivated her actions. Charles closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing a physical blow. "So you decided to steal from her collection? To take what was never meant to be yours?" "I thought it should be mine," Camilla said, her voice breaking. "I'm your wife. I'm the queen consort. I deserve to have beautiful things to wear to represent the monarchy." Charles shook his head slowly. "You don't understand, do you? Those pieces weren't just jewelry. They were part of my mother's legacy, symbols of her lifetime of service. They were meant to be preserved for history, not worn by someone who resented their original owner." The conversation was becoming increasingly painful for everyone in the room to witness. This was no longer just a legal matter, but a deeply personal tragedy playing out between husband and wife. Thornfield stepped forward diplomatically. "Your Majesty, we need to decide how to proceed. The evidence is clear, and there are legal requirements that must be met regardless of family relationships." Charles straightened, and everyone could see him transforming from hurt husband back into the King of England. "What are our options?" Margaret Thornfield consulted her notes before responding to the king's question. The legal implications were complex, involving not just criminal law but constitutional considerations that had never been tested in modern British history. "Your Majesty," she began carefully, "we have several paths forward, but each carries significant risks and consequences. First, we could proceed with formal criminal charges. The evidence is overwhelming, and British law makes no exceptions for royal family members in cases of theft." Charles listened intently while Camilla visibly shuddered at the mention of criminal charges. The thought of being prosecuted like a common criminal was terrifying, but even worse was the public humiliation that would inevitably follow. However, Thornfield continued, pursuing criminal charges would almost certainly result in a very public trial. The media attention would be unprecedented, and the damage to the monarchy's reputation could be severe. The constitutional implications of a reigning queen consort facing criminal prosecution are completely unknown. Sir William stepped forward to add his perspective. "Your Majesty, we also need to consider the security implications. If this matter becomes public knowledge, it could encourage other attempts to target royal collections. It might also raise questions about the competence of our security arrangements." Charles absorbed this information while studying his wife, who sat slumped in her chair looking defeated. The weight of kingship was pressing down on him as he realized that every decision he made would have consequences far beyond their personal relationship. "What other options do we have?" he asked. "We could handle this as an internal family matter," Thornfield replied. "Full restitution, private accountability measures, and strict confidentiality agreements with all witnesses. However, this approach carries its own risks." Morrison, who had remained silent throughout the legal discussion, felt compelled to speak up. "Your Majesty, if I may say so, the men and women who serve in royal security take their oaths very seriously. They need to trust that justice applies to everyone regardless of rank or title." Charles turned to look at the captain with newfound respect. "You're saying that covering this up could damage morale among the security staff?" "Yes, sir," Morrison replied firmly. "If word gets out that someone can steal from the royal collection without consequences simply because of their title, it undermines everything we're sworn to protect." Camilla finally found her voice again. "But if you prosecute me, it will destroy the monarchy's reputation anyway. How does that serve the crown's interests?" Charles studied his wife with a mixture of sadness and growing resolve. "The monarchy's strength has always come from its moral authority, Camilla. If we compromise that for the sake of avoiding scandal, we become exactly what our critics say we are. Privileged elites who believe we're above the law." The king's words carried a finality that made everyone in the room understand that he was making a fundamental decision about his reign and his values. This was not just about handling a family crisis, but about defining what kind of monarch he intended to be. However, Charles continued, turning back to Thornfield, I want to explore every legal option before making a final decision. Is there any precedent for this kind of situation? Any alternative legal frameworks we could consider? Thornfield had anticipated this question and had been researching precedents since the incident began. Your Majesty, there are provisions for handling crimes within royal households that date back centuries. Historically, serious offenses by royal family members have sometimes been handled through a special court system that maintains some privacy while ensuring justice is served. This revelation sparked immediate interest from everyone in the room. The possibility of finding a middle ground between public prosecution and private cover-up offered hope for a solution that might satisfy both justice and discretion. Tell me more about this historical precedent, Charles commanded. The Crown Court of Royal Justice was used as recently as the 1930s for handling serious offenses involving royal household members, Thornfield explained. It consists of senior judges, legal experts, and representatives of the Crown who can impose significant penalties while maintaining confidentiality about the specific details. Camilla looked up with the first glimmer of hope she had felt since being caught. Does that mean this doesn't have to become public? It means, Charles said firmly, that if you are found guilty through this process, you would face real consequences, while the specific details might remain private. But make no mistake, Camilla, this would still be a formal legal proceeding with the possibility of serious penalties. Sir William appeared thoughtful. Your Majesty, this approach might also allow us to address the security concerns Captain Morrison raised. The guards would see that justice was served, even if they couldn't know all the details. Morrison nodded his agreement. That would be acceptable, Your Majesty. What matters is that the law applies equally to everyone, not necessarily that every detail becomes public knowledge. Charles made his decision with the decisiveness that kingship required. Very well. Ms. Thornfield, I want you to begin proceedings to convene the Crown Court of Royal Justice immediately. I want this handled properly, legally, and with all due process. Camilla's relief was short-lived as the implications sank in. Charles, what does this mean for us? For our marriage? The king looked at his wife with profound sadness. That depends entirely on you, Camilla. Your actions tonight have broken my trust in ways I'm not sure can be repaired. But first we need to deal with the legal consequences of what you've done. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated what would happen next. The historical precedent offered a path forward, but it was still unclear what penalties the court might impose or how this would affect the royal family's future. Thornfield began making notes about the complex process of convening a court that hadn't been used in decades. Your Majesty, this will take several days to organize properly. In the meantime, I'm afraid the Queen Consort will need to remain under house arrest to ensure she doesn't interfere with the evidence or attempt to leave the country. House arrest? Camilla gasped. You can't be serious. Charles looked at his wife with steely resolve. You brought this on yourself, Camilla. Until this matter is resolved through proper legal channels, you'll remain confined to the castle under guard supervision. Sir William will make the necessary arrangements. The transformation was complete. Charles had gone from shocked husband to impartial monarch, placing the integrity of the crown above his personal feelings. It was a demonstration of character that impressed even Morrison, who had seen many royal family members struggle with the demands of duty versus personal loyalty. As the meeting concluded and arrangements were made for Camilla's confinement, everyone understood that they had witnessed a turning point, not just in the royal marriage but in the reign of King Charles III. 3 days later, the Crown Court of Royal Justice convened in the ancient Chamber of State within Windsor Castle. The room had not been used for its original purpose in nearly a century, but its dark oak panels and solemn atmosphere seemed perfectly suited for the gravity of the proceedings about to unfold. 5 distinguished judges, led by Lord Chief Justice Sir Edmund Blackwood, took their places at the elevated bench. The court also included the Archbishop of Canterbury, representing the moral authority of the Crown, and 2 senior members of Parliament who served as constitutional advisors. This was British justice at its most formal and traditional level. Camilla entered the chamber flanked by her legal counsel, looking diminished in the vast space that had once hosted the trials of nobles and courtiers. She had spent the past 3 days under house arrest, her every movement monitored by guards who had once served under her command as queen consort. The humiliation was almost unbearable. King Charles sat in the observer section, maintaining the careful neutrality required of his position as head of state. His presence lent weight to the proceedings while also demonstrating that no one, regardless of their relationship to the crown, was above justice. Captain Morrison had been called as the primary witness, and his testimony was delivered with the same professional precision he had shown throughout the crisis. He recounted the events of that night without embellishment or personal opinion, simply stating the facts as he had observed them. I witnessed Her Majesty removing jewelry from the late Queen's collection and placing it in a bag, Morrison testified. When questioned about her authorization to do so, she was unable to provide any legitimate documentation. Her behavior was consistent with someone attempting to steal valuable property. Camilla's barrister, Sir Marcus Pemberton, one of Britain's most expensive criminal defense attorneys, attempted to challenge Morrison's interpretation of events. Captain Morrison, is it not possible that my client was simply organizing items that she believed would eventually be hers to inherit? Morrison remained calm under cross-examination. Sir, in my 25 years of service, I have observed many authorized transfers of royal property. They always involve proper documentation, witnesses, and occur during normal business hours. The Queen Consort's behavior that night was not consistent with authorized activity. The testimony was damaging, but Pemberton had prepared other lines of defense. Your Honors, he addressed the court, my client's actions, while admittedly unauthorized, stemmed from a genuine misunderstanding about her inheritance rights and her desire to honor the late Queen's memory by wearing her jewelry at state functions. Sir Edmund Blackwood, a man known for his sharp intellect and impatience with weak arguments, leaned forward. Sir Marcus, are you suggesting that theft can be excused by good intentions or misunderstandings about inheritance law? Not excused, Your Honor, but perhaps viewed with more lenient consideration given the unique pressures and emotional circumstances surrounding my client's position. The Archbishop of Canterbury, whose presence added moral weight to the proceedings, spoke for the first time. The Crown's moral authority rests on the principle that all are equal before God and the law. If we make exceptions based on rank or circumstance, we undermine the very foundation of our constitutional monarchy. Margaret Thornfield presented the evidence with methodical thoroughness. Each piece of stolen jewelry was catalogued, photographed, and valued. The total came to over £3 million, a sum that elevated the crime from simple theft to grand larceny with potential prison time. Your Honors, Thornfield concluded her presentation, the evidence is overwhelming. The defendant was caught in the act by a reliable witness, made multiple false statements when confronted, and attempted to use her position to avoid accountability. This was not a misunderstanding but a deliberate criminal act. When called to testify on her own behalf, Camilla took the stand with visible reluctance. Her barrister had coached her extensively, but the weight of the formal proceedings and the piercing gaze of the judges made it difficult to maintain her composure. I deeply regret my actions, she began, reading from a prepared statement. The stress of adjusting to my new role as Queen Consort, combined with grief over the late Queen's passing, led me to make a terrible error in judgment. Sir Edmund interrupted her prepared remarks. Ma'am, this court is interested in facts, not excuses. Did you or did you not deliberately remove valuable jewelry from the royal collection without authorization? Camilla's prepared defenses crumbled under direct questioning. Yes, I did take the jewelry, but I never intended to keep it permanently. I thought I had a right to wear it as Queen Consort. But you acknowledge that you had no formal authorization to remove these items? Yes, Camilla whispered, the admission seeming to physically diminish her. And when confronted by Captain Morrison, you made false statements about having the king's permission? Yes. The simple admissions were more damaging than hours of testimony. Camilla had effectively confessed to theft and lying to a royal guard, undermining any remaining sympathy the court might have had for her situation. The most dramatic moment came when Sir Edmund asked about her motivations. Ma'am, please explain to this court why you chose to steal these particular items in the middle of the night, rather than make a formal request through proper channels. Camilla looked toward Charles, who maintained his impassive expression, then back at the judges. Because I knew they would say no, she admitted. The late queen never accepted me into the family. Her staff still treated me as an outsider. I thought if I could wear her jewelry, it might help establish my legitimacy as queen consort. This admission revealed the depth of her resentment and the calculated nature of her crime. It was not a moment of weakness but a deliberate decision based on anger and entitlement. Sir Marcus attempted damage control during his closing argument. Your Honors, my client stands before you humbled by her mistakes. She has returned all stolen property and expressed genuine remorse. Surely mercy and understanding are appropriate given her unique position and the pressure she faces. But the prosecution's closing argument was devastating in its simplicity. Your Honors, the defendant committed theft. She was caught, she lied, and she has confessed. Her position as queen consort makes her crime more serious, not less, because it betrays the trust placed in her by the British people. As the court recessed to deliberate, everyone understood that they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered in royal history. The decision reached in this ancient chamber would determine not only Camilla's fate, but also the future moral authority of the monarchy itself. After 3 hours of deliberation, the Crown Court of Royal Justice reconvened to deliver their verdict. The ancient chamber was filled with tension as Sir Edmund Blackwood prepared to announce a decision that would reshape the British monarchy's future. Will the defendant please rise? Sir Edmund commanded in his authoritative voice. Camilla stood shakily, supported by her barrister. Her face was pale and her hands trembled as she faced the 5 judges who held her fate in their hands. Charles maintained his stoic expression, though the strain of the past week was evident in the lines around his eyes. After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, Sir Edmund began, this court finds the defendant guilty of theft of crown property, lying to royal security personnel, and breach of trust in her position as queen consort. The words hit Camilla like physical blows. Despite her lawyer's optimistic predictions, the court had shown no mercy for her royal status. She swayed slightly but managed to remain standing as Sir Edmund continued. However, this court also recognizes the unique circumstances surrounding this case and the potential consequences for the constitutional monarchy. Therefore, we will now proceed to sentencing with consideration for both justice and the stability of the crown. Sir Edmund paused to consult with his fellow judges before delivering the sentence that everyone had been waiting to hear. The defendant is hereby sentenced to immediate removal from all royal titles and positions. She is permanently banished from the royal household and banned from all royal residences and state functions. All privileges and benefits associated with her position as queen consort are revoked effective immediately. Camilla gasped audibly, the reality of losing everything hitting her with devastating force. She had expected some punishment, but complete expulsion from the royal family was worse than her darkest fears. Furthermore, Sir Edmund continued relentlessly, the defendant shall serve 2 years of supervised community service, including work with organizations that support victims of theft and fraud. She shall also pay full restitution for legal costs and security expenses incurred during this investigation. The sentence was severe but carefully crafted to serve justice while avoiding the constitutional crisis that would have resulted from imprisoning a queen consort. By stripping her of all royal status first, the court had effectively made her a private citizen subject to criminal penalties. Finally, Sir Edmund concluded, the defendant is prohibited from making any public statements about this matter or the royal family for a period of 10 years. Violation of this order will result in immediate imprisonment. Charles closed his eyes briefly as the full weight of the sentence sank in. His wife of many years was being effectively erased from royal history, expelled from the family and institution he now led. It was a devastating personal loss, but he understood it was necessary for the integrity of the crown. Camilla collapsed back into her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her fall from grace. In less than a week, she had gone from Queen Consort of England to a convicted criminal banned from the royal family. The price of her greed and resentment had been everything she had worked for decades to achieve. Sir Edmund addressed the broader implications of the case. This court's decision sends a clear message that no one, regardless of position or title, is above the law in Britain. The monarchy's strength lies in its moral authority, which can only be maintained through unwavering commitment to justice and accountability. As the court session concluded, security personnel approached to escort Camilla from the castle for the final time. She looked toward Charles with desperate pleading in her eyes, hoping for some sign of forgiveness or support. But the king maintained his official composure. Captain Morrison, who had started this entire chain of events with his discovery that night, watched the proceedings with mixed emotions. He felt vindicated that justice had been served, but he also felt sympathy for the human cost of Camilla's choices. His decision to report the theft had been correct, but it had resulted in the destruction of a royal marriage and the disgrace of the queen consort. As Camilla was led from the chamber, she paused briefly near Morrison. "I hope you're satisfied," she said bitterly. "You've destroyed everything." Morrison looked at her with the same steady professionalism he had shown throughout the crisis. "Your Majesty, I simply did my duty. You destroyed everything yourself when you chose to steal from the crown you were supposed to serve." The words were harsh but accurate, and Camilla had no response. She was led away to begin her new life as an outcast from the institution that had defined her identity for so many years. King Charles remained in the chamber long after everyone else had departed, sitting alone among the symbols of centuries of royal justice. The weight of kingship had never felt heavier than it did in that moment, having to choose between personal loyalty and institutional integrity. Sir William approached cautiously. "Your Majesty, what are your instructions regarding the Queen Consort's former quarters and belongings?" Charles looked up with tired eyes. "Remove everything. I want no reminders of this betrayal in my home. Donate her personal effects to charity and have her quarters prepared for other use. And regarding security protocols, Your Majesty, this incident has revealed some vulnerabilities in our systems." Charles nodded. "Work with Captain Morrison to review and strengthen all procedures. What happened must never be allowed to happen again." In the days that followed, news of Camilla's expulsion from the royal family spread through official channels, though the specific details remained confidential, as the court had ordered. The public was told only that the Queen Consort had been found guilty of serious misconduct and had been stripped of her titles and privileges. Captain Morrison was quietly promoted to deputy head of security in recognition of his integrity and professionalism during the crisis. His actions had prevented a potentially even greater scandal and had demonstrated the importance of maintaining high standards regardless of personal consequences. For the British monarchy, the episode became a defining moment in Charles's reign. His willingness to enforce justice against his own wife established his moral authority and demonstrated that the modern crown was committed to accountability and the rule of law. The stolen jewelry was returned to the royal collection and placed under enhanced security. A new protocol was established requiring multiple authorizations and witnesses for any access to the late queen's personal effects, ensuring that such a betrayal could never happen again. As for Camilla, she disappeared into obscurity, beginning her community service in anonymity, while the institution she had tried to exploit continued its ancient mission of service to the British people. Her fall from grace served as a powerful reminder that in constitutional monarchy, no one is above the law, and the crown's authority rests on moral integrity rather than mere privilege. The night that Captain Morrison discovered a light under the door of the blue drawing room had changed everything, proving that sometimes doing one's duty, no matter how difficult, is the only way to preserve the institutions that define a nation's character.